Well, good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to talk about some of the kind of learning and reflections and ponderings we're doing. So this isn't kind of a lecture, this is very much some of the reflections we're doing at the British Council around our kind of heritage work at the moment. And just by way of a quick introduction to who we are. So we're the UK's cultural relations organisation. We're funded by the UK government. A mixture of DCMS and the UK Foreign Office kind of funds our work. And we're about building connections, relationships and trust between the UK and the world. So some of you may know us from our English exams work, our education work, but also from our growing arts and heritage work as well. So we work across 110 different countries at the moment. We work predominantly outside kind of in countries such as Africa. We work across East Asia. We work in the Americas, for example. But we really want to build connections, deeper relationships, mutual understanding, co-creation. You're going to hear me talk a lot about people-centered approaches and co-creation over the kind of next 10 minutes. And that's kind of the heart and essence of our approach of our work. So we build networks, we build relationships, but we also have this thing around insight, understanding and knowledge, but also learning. And we find that we've got a particular role we can play and a convening role that we can play around understanding and learning and bringing that learning into networks, building and bringing that learning and insight and knowledge around particular themes such as sustainable development, well-being and the SDGs, for example. So a little bit about just setting the scene. So our heritage work, we have two flagship programs in our heritage work. Some of you may know our Cultural Protection Fund, which has been in operation since 2016 in partnership with DCMS, which has been supporting across about 20 countries heritage at risk due to conflict or climate change. We've also got a second program called Cultural Heritage and Inclusive Growth, which I'm going to talk a little bit about today over the next 10 minutes, which has been operating across 4 different countries and it's really an action research program. So it's been set up as a learning action research program, working across Kenya, Vietnam, Colombia, for example, looking at inclusive practice around intangible heritage and building kind of a people-centered model around that. So just kind of setting the scene a little bit to our work. So these are some of the reflections that we've been pondering over the past couple of years around our heritage work. And we've also been publishing some of this in kind of thought in essays and various research reports. So we did a joint report with the RSA back in 2018, looking at inclusive growth, well-being and heritage in the UK and through our Cultural Heritage Inclusive Growth Programme. And you can see on the right there kind of ingredients we kind of think them as kind of active ingredients to kind of an inclusive approach to heritage, but also it's also transferable to other kind of thematics as well. So we're very much into kind of how people-centered approaches empower, bottom-up, co-create mutuality through an inclusive approach, which then enables a range of outcomes for communities and for people through our heritage work. So it's very much multidimensional, it's very much dynamic, and it's very much rooted in context, really responding to local needs, local context, and how heritage can play a role and be an enabling feature within those. Some of you may have seen earlier this month, the Centre for Work's Wellbeing kind of published a new report on creativity and pathways to wellbeing. This is in very small print, but you can actually see in here some of the mechanisms for wellbeing. And into the major systematic literature review, looking across a range of evidence and research, looking at how and what are those mechanisms to get into well-being, and kind of taking that kind of people-centered approach is one of those key mechanisms that you can enable that enables well-being going forward. So you can find this on the Centre for What Works Wellbeing's website to download. There's a meaty report, but there's also a 2-page summary and there's a briefing paper as well. So you don't need to read the whole 110 pages. So that kind of sets the context. So that's kind of the theory that we're looking at, is how people-centered approaches can enable community voice, community leadership, and how that plays into that well-being and empowerment and gender. So a little bit on Cultural Heritage Inclusive Growth. So this started in 2018. It's funded by the UK Foreign Office through our UK aid budget. It's been working in countries such as Vietnam, Kenya, and Colombia. So, for example, in Colombia, it's been working with 6 indigenous communities in the Amazon, in kind of very rural settings, looking at very much intangible heritage. But it's about how cultural heritage through taking a people-centered approach, can deliver some of those social outcomes, those inclusive growth outcomes, those inclusion outcomes, including well-being. So it's about supporting communities to define their own value of their cultural heritage, to develop their own opportunities for their own benefits. And it's very much about long-term change. So these are multi-year programs, multi-year projects. This isn't a short-term drop in, drop out. This is very much a slow burn, multi-year program that's still ongoing. So these are very much reflections and learnings of an ongoing program that's still going. We're also very keen how this relates to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we've been very much aligning this work to the Sustainable Development Agenda, particularly as we look as the UN looks to renew and look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals this year as well. So we've been very much looking at this as a sustainable development program and how heritage can play a role within that. So we started to articulate what a people-centered approach may look like in these kind of communities, in these settings. So how it's inclusive, how it's participatory, how it's sustainable, how it builds local capacity, how it influences policy at a local, national and regional level, how it can be far-reaching, how it can be local-led, how it can be mutual. These are kind of ingredients within the toolbox that we're playing around with and exploring and experimenting with at the minute. So then how does that toolbox of kind of people-centered approaches, what does that then enable? What does that build? So that's what we've wrapped around this action research program. It's a learning program to really capture that over the years as well. So this is a long-term investment by us. So it's through this program to date, we've worked with 42,000 people across 4 different countries. We've supported nearly 3,000 heritage practitioners locally in those countries through capacity building programs, skills development programs. But those have been designed locally. They have been based on local need, local context, and very much rooted in the local, not British Council going in saying, you need this training program, this is how you do it. So it's been very much co-created and mutually led. We've worked with over 110 organisations, some in the UK, some internationally as well. But we've also been playing a role, and kind of this is where the sharing of learning reflective practice comes in around policymakers. So working with Vietnamese cultural ministry, for example, working with the Colombian cultural ministry, for example, about how cultural heritage can play across their policy agendas and their wellbeing agendas and also their inclusion agendas as well. So this is one of the things that this is from Culture Grows, which is the Kenya project that we've got. And we very much see this program as we're globally connected, but locally rooted solutions. So the program is very much a framework around inclusive growth and well-being, but it's got locally rooted solutions. So having a global program has enabled us to share learning, to share practice, to share ideas, also to share what doesn't work. So we've been really interested, and these are the really rich conversations we've been having with our partners and countries, is what isn't working, and not just celebrating the success that they do, but also the reflections and learning and how we adapt and how we change, particularly in the post-COVID world, and also how it feeds into the post-2030 agenda as well. This, I'm not going to play the film, so I'm not going to test my luck with the technology, is from Vietnam. This has very much been about local music. So the communities that we've been working in rural Vietnam, and they've been trying to preserve kind of a very specialist gong culture, the gong music culture. And we've been trying to document that, how we digitally preserve that culture that's at risk of disappearing. It's an intergenerational project as well, how we get young people inspired within that. But this was very much based on consultation with the local communities about what do you want to preserve? How do you want to preserve this? How we can help you and enable that. So enabling has been one of the key words that we've been using here within this people-centered approach. And then how that enables, say, that inclusive growth, but also that well-being and that empowerment of the local community to take ownership of their heritage and what that enables. So what does it mean? So people-centered approach is a loose term. When we started to play around with this and when we started to test this and experiment with this, especially in an international context as well, where definitions are fluid, contexts are very different. So it's a very broad umbrella, but it's about power and process. And we've been exploring the dynamic between power and process. And when you refer back to that well-being mechanisms as well, there's a lot here about community leadership, community empowerment, and how that enables well-being going forward. So it's about challenging norms. It's about challenging power structures. It's about how we can develop locally and how we facilitate locally experts as well, and how we use human-centered design and asset-based community development. So these are things that we know that the UK heritage sector has, for example, and we've been trying to explore both ways, what the UK sector can learn internationally and what internationally they can learn from the UK. So it's been a two-way reflective learning process that we've been doing. So we've also been looking at what difference does it make. So we talk about people-centered approaches, but what actually difference does it make? And how revolutionary is it? And we've also been looking at this within the kind of not only the cultural heritage practice, but also the evaluation and learning that we do as well. So we've been experimenting about how we build people-centered approaches in and how we bring people into the evaluation and learning process as well. So we've got a peer learning program, for example, that we enable, we fund, but it's very much led by, and it operates across 16 different countries for heritage practitioners. But the agendas and themes and what they learn is very much led by the peer learning group themselves. And what they want to talk about, what they want to learn, what they want to share, the topics they want to do, but also how that then feeds back into their practice as well. So we've taken a very hands-off approach, but we enable that platform. But it's very much been about ownership by them. So these are some of the key learnings. As I say, this is still ongoing. These programs started in 2018. They're still funded for another 3 years. But these are kind of the key kind of ingredients that we're starting to see approach from this people-centered approach, and how that then enables things like well-being and other outcomes as well. So meeting people where they are allows space and time for things to develop organically. This is one of the things we didn't appreciate, is how slow burn, how long this takes. And giving that time and space. Time has been one of the key things that we've had to enable here, and being patient. Support needs, aspirations, and benefits of local communities through active listening and responding. So very much co-creation, very much mutuality. Ensure local ownership and being locally led is at the heart through participation, inclusion, and decision-making. So very much not us doing the decision-making, very much in context, in community, taking the decisions. We've really also been unpicking the how, the process. So not only being interested in the outcomes and the outputs, but actually how. So we've been, a colleague of mine, Nikki Locke, we've been really looking at the how question, being flexible, being responsive, being adaptive, being curious about this, and being open to learning as well. Celebrating diversity, different perspectives, bringing it all together to create a shared vision. Very much co-design, with communities to access wider opportunities. So using the British Council platform and our networks and our relationships to enable access to wider opportunities for these communities through their heritage, but also being locally led ideas, locally led solutions, locally led approaches. We have learned so much and so rich about ideas, approaches, different outcomes, different ways, not only about evaluating, but actually the how as well, and how we capture that. That's one of the key things that we want to do. So just finally, just on that point, this has been a multi-year program, multi-country program, but one of the key things we wanted to do is capture the richness and diversity of that learning and insight. So we've been publishing over the past kind of 12 months a number of key reports. They're all available on our website, the British Council website. So one has been a thought leadership essay collection working with Inherit, which has been looking at inclusive growth and cultural heritage and people-centered approaches. And it's a whole series of essays from a range of heritage practitioners from across the globe. We published last year our review of heritage culture against Sustainable Development Goals through the Missing Foundation report, working with UNESCO. We've also, as I say, been talking to the RSA and look around inclusive growth and what that looks like and well-being within that. And we've also been publishing a number of documents looking at sustainable development, heritage, culture, through things like the Cultural Protection Fund together with DCMS. So we're on a journey, we're on a learning journey. We want to share what we're learning as well, because there's a real rich learning happening in this space, and this is part of the journey. So thank you. Thank you very much.